Hello and welcome to A Fuller Understanding on the Auteur Limits channel. Where we go through the filmography of Sam Fuller. I am your host as ever, Craig Ennis, and with me is my charming co-host Robert Beams.
Hello, Craig. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
Yeah, very good, thank you. I'm looking forward to diving into to this. I would consider the first. Is it too much of a spoiler to say up front? The first good Sam Fuller film.
Yeah.
Playing my hand a little bit there.
No, I think this is the first. Yeah, we'll go with good. So a little bit of background here, actually, and one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast in the first place. This was the first Sam Fuller film that I was exposed to when I was at university. It was towards the end of it was in the beginning of my first year, and I was doing a module on new Hollywood and what came before it, and one of the options to study was this film, and I didn't like the other ones. So I decided I was going to write an essay on the steel helmet, and I had to order a VHS copy from the States, an NTSC VHS. It was the first time I ever used eBay. So there we go, a little bit of trivia for you. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. I've still got the VHS, actually. It's up in that cupboard just over there, but
nice.
I couldn't dig it out, unfortunately.
So when you say you didn't like the other ones, it sounded like you'd seen them all and made a choice, but now it sounds like you actually read the titles and then ordered a VHS from the US of the one you like the sound of.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. I can't remember what the other films were for the life of me, but the options were limited, and the steel helmet looked like the one that I could stomach watching over and over again. And then you stumbled across it on Criterion.
I didn't stumble across it so much as you recommended it to me. I think there was. I tend to try and watch through a lot of the films leaving Criterion each month, and I think it was possibly one month it was on its way out, and you tipped me off and said you should watch that one before it goes. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So this is the first one we're watching this time around that I've already seen previously. Yeah, I have a lot of nice things to say about this one, unlike with the first two. So there's a lot. I take it there's a lot of context and background to this one, because like even just the Criterion synopsis suggests that there was like an FBI investigation on Fuller for the content. There were arguments about the star because he wanted this like Gene Evans and stuff. So
yeah.
So yeah, I'm saying like I guess you've got a lot to say on this one for the context.
Yeah, I mean it depends which way we want to go. I mean, just to introduce it. So one of the things that really helped this film to begin with was the timeliness of it. So it comes out in 1951. The Korean War starts in June 1950, and this was the first film about the Korean War at a time when it was in the headlines. So it was really timely. It was like the timing of like the way Casablanca was incredibly timely, coming out at exactly the right time to catch the public imagination. Yeah, to the point where I think he'd actually started to write it as a World War II film and just changed it into a Korean War film in order to kind of catch what was going on. Like you say, I think, I don't know, because the Baron of Arizona wasn't a hit, but the kind of the cachet of I Shot Jesse James was still very much with him, and Lippert still wanted to be a little bit more ambitious. But also, I think the studio started courting him a little bit, and there was an idea that the studio wanted to take this, put John Wayne in it, and make it a much bigger deal. But he was thinking what he wanted to do was make this kind of realistic-ish war film, and he didn't want it to be turned into a gung-ho hero film. There's some great quotes about there's some great quotes here where I can't find the exact one, but he talks about he wanted to make it as realistic as possible, and that the only way you could make it truly realistic would be to occasionally fire shots at the audience. But he talks about he wanted to make a film that was largely walking and boredom, punctuated by short moments of extreme violence, and then more walking and more boredom, to sort of get a kind of realistic feel of what it was like to be an infantryman on the ground in a war. And he was thinking that if John Wayne came in, it would become a much simpler good versus evil story. So what he does is he resists all that. He goes for Gene Evans, who is unknown at this point. Done a couple
and a World
of
War II vet like Fuller as well.
World War II vet, but not an infantryman, an engineer. So they have a little bit of banter about that. But he's kind of he's kind of sold on Gene Evans right from the off, and says this is him, and goes to bat for him, even when somebody else is bought in, a guy called Larry Parks. Lippert tries, someone tries to replace him with a guy called Larry Parks, who is kind of like an old friend of Lippert's, and is kind of on the verge of being blacklisted by the McCarthy.
Yeah, so I saw that.
Yeah, they're trying to get him in to get him some work before he's blacklisted, but Sam Fuller's already committed the part to Gene Evans and kind of stays with Gene Evans.
It sounds like Lippert, who I don't think we've said on this episode, is the producer of these films, the first 3 films. It sounds like Lippert was quite right on, because not only is he financing and producing this film, which we'll get talking about all this in more detail later, but which is quite incendiary and challenging in some ways, but he's also, you say, they're trying to help his friend who's about to get blacklisted by the House of Un-American Activities Committee. So is it fair to say that Lippert is, I don't know if you call him like a sympathizer or something, but is he sort of that way inclined? Is he sort of on the left, or is
I don't know, because I mean, we'll talk about the reaction to this as well, but you know, like there's a lot of there are some references in Fuller's autobiography to goddamn commies. So you know, they're not they don't seem to have a consistent political ideology apart from treat people well and, you know, be good
I
to
was
your friends.
talking about Lippert, not Fuller, though.
Oh, right.
Like Lippert, because he's financing this film and he's going to bat for this other actor who's about to get blacklisted. Is Lippert sort of that sort of
possibly? Possibly. I mean, it doesn't really go into that too much. But anyway, he sticks with Gene Evans and actually decides, rather than he's offered 3 times the budget of the last film he's offered a high budget basically, and he says, no, I'm going to make it for less than I shot Jesse James, and I'm going to shoot it on 10 days, and we're going to do all the exterior stuff in Griffith Park. I don't know if you know Griffith Park. It's
no,
I think that's where the observatory is, I think, but there was an old zoo there that's since become decrepit as well. It's quite a famous landmark in the Los Angeles area. So they shoot some stuff out there. They have 25 extras for the final battle scenes, and they use a load of stock footage.
Yeah,
but it is like done on a shoestring in 10 days, so that Sam Fuller can keep the script as written with all the kind of incendiary elements to it without anybody interfering. In fact, he puts up a sign on the studio doors in bold letters saying, no associate producers, co-producers, executive producers, or any producers admitted herein. So he kind of, once he's underway, once he's got the money, he's running, and he's kind of getting this done before anybody stops him.
Wow.
Yeah,
because we can talk about this in context when we talk about through the film, but just I've got a list here of all the things this does during the Korean War in a Korean War film that are potentially, because I don't really know about this FBI investigation and what got him in trouble, but I've got a list of things that might have got him in trouble. So you've got an incompetent commander who's got people beneath him who are much more capable, including ethnic minorities who we're told are being held back, even though they're more competent than their white commander. I can see that being potentially problematic for people. There's a lot of cynicism about the whole mission of the war, about the point of doing any of it. There's needless kind of deaths and killing, but on both sides, like there are American soldiers who die pointlessly. There's also times when they show like there's a couple of people they shoot who are like trying to fight them, but they're at a shrine and they're just two like I guess like Korean farmers who have picked up weapons, so you see this sort of the cost of war there. You also have this kid whose parents have been killed in the war. You get the desecration of a religious monument because the Americans in a kind of Team America World Police style kind of go into this Buddhist monument, and then by the end of the film it's basically destroyed. You get lots of discussion of racism in the US and a kind of a North Korean person explaining kind of, but hang on, in the US, you're not allowed on the buses and all that kind of thing, which I can imagine was also quite incendiary. You also get talk about internment camps for the Japanese in World War II. And you also get a sort of depiction of what we would now call PTSD that back then they wouldn't have, but where you get the kind of Gene Evans character kind of shell-shocked from all this stuff he's undergoing. And like I'm sure there's even more you could point out in there, but like just that
definitely
list of things.
There's the murder of an unarmed POW as well.
Yeah, that's true.
By an American
war crimes committed by Americans, absolutely. Yeah. So exactly.
Yeah. So do you want to start by talking us through the film?
Yeah, very briefly. I'm not going to go like minute by minute, but like but basically we start with, I think that one of the best openings of a film, I think that I can imagine. Like you have this just, it looks like it's a static image of a helmet with a bullet in it over the credits. And then when the credits end, the helmet moves and you realize actually we're watching somebody who's wearing this helmet. And he starts going along the floor and you find his hands are bound. And it's clear from the hole in his helmet and the context of his bound hands and all of the dead people with bound hands around him that he's the sole survivor of like an execution, basically, of his whole platoon. And he manages, this is Gene Evans, he manages to get uncut by this young South Korean boy who he calls Short Round, which I guess Lucas and Spielberg enjoyed. And he kind of buddies up with this kid, and then he kind of meets a few other stragglers, bumps into this other platoon that immediately he kind of refuses the call and says, listen guys, you're going to die out there, it's bullshit, I'm not going to join you. But then that kind of like circles back round to kind of I guess do the right thing and join these people. And then they end up sort of getting into this Buddhist temple where they're doing a bit of recon from the top, right, to try and direct other troops.
Yeah, they are setting up an observation post to tell the artillery where to fire.
And basically they get in a bit of trouble there. They get attacked. They get waves of people. By the end, there's only
there's a weird slasher thing going on where there's a couple of North Korean soldiers sort of skulking around, taking them out silently.
It's like Riddick. And then, you get like 4 of the platoon survive, I think, at the end, which unusually for a film as well like this, a couple of them one of them's the like Japanese American, and one of them's the black medic. And usually in slasher movies as well, sort of it's not usually the kind of POC that sort of survive these things. So you get those guys survive, and Gene Evans and this kind of bald guy survive, and they then get met by another platoon, which echoes the beginning of the film, where he's just survived a traumatic encounter, and then he gets absorbed into this other unit and does it again. Bumps into some other people, and they're like, all right, come on, soldiers. And then they walk off to just do the whole fucking thing again. And then Fuller brings up this message that says, like, I think it just says, there is no end to this story. And it's not just, I guess the literal meaning at the time could have been taken, we don't currently know the end to the Korean War, but it's got this much more ominous, far-reaching one of there's no end to this story of American troops dying pointlessly, going from one traumatic massacre to the next, being led by incompetent commanders, taken to the next kind of killing field for unknown reasons or for dubious reasons. And it's a really powerful ending, I think, and it's but that's basically, there's a lot of shenanigans along the way, and there are some interpersonal sort of relationships between different members of the team and some interesting conversations, but that's basically what happens in the film, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. I mean, there's like you say, the opening image is great, where he kind of moves and he explains that this bullet he's been shot in the head, but the bullet's kind of gone in at such an angle that it's kind of just skimmed and then kind of ricocheted around the helmet and come back out, and it's supposed to be like a lucky helmet now. And it becomes a bit of a thing going on. It's also really nice bit where, as he's struggling, you see this pair of feet without shoes, just walking, holding the rifle, and you don't know what's going to happen. And there's this tension. A short round puts the rifle down, picks up a knife, and you know wonder if he's going to be killed, but is kind of set free. And there's that kind of "your heart is in my hands" moment, isn't there? Where he's and that kind of takes us on our journey. It was a cheaply made film, and it has to be said, it looks cheap. It is a lot of foggy sets and trees and studios and that kind of thing.
But that's the thing, is it looks cheap sometimes, then at other times it doesn't. Like there's bits like in the opening where they're on location, and I think it looks pretty good. But then the next scene, they will then be very obviously on a studio set, or when they're in the temple, they're very obviously on a set, because everywhere they're looking around outside is like white walls, like bare white walls. There's no trees or canopy, or and also he's using, like you said in the first episode, because he shot things quite quickly and in kind of maybe one setup, he tends to use these optical zooms that look really shit, and then he also, like all that stock footage obviously doesn't match later in the film with everything else that's going on, as stock footage tends not to do, but it's very pronounced here. And that bit, even when the short round character kind of rescues him with the knife, there's all this swelling of this music, and then when the tension is relieved, the music just ends, but it just ends like really abruptly, like it doesn't like fade out or go into something. It's just like da 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 da. You know, it just stops.
He's not afraid. He's not afraid of an on-the-nose musical cue. There's a nice bit in during the titles where Gene Evans' name comes up and it just goes, bah! You know, he's not afraid of that. A lot of this kind of story as well, a lot of the kind of things that happen. So the idea is that he wants to do this kind of really realistic portrayal of what life is like for what he calls the doggies, the dog faces, the infantrymen. And one of the things that really kind of, I think when we did the Kurosawa thing, we talked a couple of times about people walking and talking and not saying anything interesting. But one of the things that this is really successful on is the conversation and the walking and talking and the dialogue and the lines and the interactions between the characters and just some of the things that Gene Evans gets to say. I've written down some of them. So like one of them is, we've taken short round. We need to get that out of here. Otherwise they'll be eating us between two big hunks of rye bread and washed down with fish eggs and vodka.
He has a line later in the film where he shouts at the prisoner of war that he shot. He shouts, "If you die, I'll kill you," which is a great line. He's got some really good lines. And the thing I want to say about Gene Evans is that obviously Fuller was right. This would be a completely different film with John Wayne. Totally different film with John Wayne from beginning to end, I imagine. But if you imagine this film with John Wayne just supplanted into it, there's no comparison between what the two would do, because Gene Evans gives off this air of just being this kind of grizzled, sort of cynical, just practical person who just wants to get through. He keeps bumping into people who are kind of incompetent and then just being like, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing. Hold it like this, do that. Oh my God, what are you up to? Fuck that." He's just really, really like dismissive and cynical and competent, but in an unshowy way. He's clearly very experienced. I read this thing about the film, maybe it's apocryphal, but one of the descriptions I read of the film said that Sam Fuller, when he met Gene Evans, threw a rifle at him, and Gene Evans immediately caught it and just immediately, I don't know, like did whatever you're supposed to do with a rifle. And he was like, "Yeah, this is the guy. He gets it." and you can kind of see that in this film, because Gene Evans carries himself and he feels so authentic, like he's this soldier, in a way that just wouldn't be if you had a Gary Cooper or a John Wayne or just like a movie star in it. And I think that as much as there's good things about the film in general, about the dialogue, about elements of kind of what it's saying in general about the war, I think the whole thing is pins around how great Gene Evans is, personally.
Yeah, agreed. He's got this kind of I mean, I think part of it is that it plays to some of that kind of John Wayneism, kind of the idea. It plays with that idea of heroism and sort of stoicism, and the idea that he's grizzled and hardened, and that it's his kind of attachment to the young boy that kind of slowly unravels. He lets himself kind of feel and be a little bit more human, and then that's what kind of ultimately kind of gets him to shoot the POW and then kind of completely lose the plot at the end. Because there is a bit where he, early on, they've already had a battle or whatever, but there's a bit where there is a dead soldier, and the lieutenant, who I can't remember the character's name, but I call him Gorman because he reminds me of Lieutenant Gorman from Aliens. He's like, go and get his dog tags, and Gene Evans is just sort of reclining, saying it's not a good idea, because he knows that it could well be booby traps. This guy goes to get the dog tags, is sent to get the dog tags, and is exploded. And then Gene Evans goes, "You've never heard of a booby trap body?" And it's like, I mean, he knows what he's doing, but he could have warned he could have warned them beforehand and saved this guy from getting blown up. And it's a little bit
it's so unceremonious as well. Like, even if you're going to say "I told you so," the guy literally just died. But it's this it's the kind of unceremonious nature of the way the guy explodes and the way they react to it and the way they carry on that also, I think, sells the reality of it. Because I imagine, I've thankfully never been in a war, but I imagine one of those things that Fuller took away from the experience, as you say, with the long walks of nothing punctuated by sudden bursts of violence. There is also this lack of humanity, presumably, where you see so many brutal acts take place that ultimately they become almost commonplace.
Well, funnily enough, so during his war experiences, he kept a diary, like a very shorthand kind of diary with stuff that he later took and put straight into his films. So this is taken from his diary. I think he's thinking about the Steel Helmet story as a World War II story at this point. Doggy booby trapped. W killed examining him. I'm not sure what W means. Is the reminder? Remember ink. I don't know what that means. Remember, include this in Finky story. Found dead, American warned, but goddamn green doggy went for dog tags and blown up, body booby trapped. Use this stupid character in Steel Helmet story to show what not to do. So even during the he must have written that just after, but his immediate reaction was, what a greenhorn. Like,
it's the sort of casual disrespect you can only have if you are a soldier who's actually there, aren't you? Like,
exactly.
if that's the politicians back in Washington or the press or just random Joe says that of the troops, then there's outrage, obviously. But but I can imagine that's the kind of world weary existence of actually being there and kind of being like, oh, because what else can you do if you kind of break down and cry about every single one of these things? You're going to go completely mad. So
yeah,
it's kind of a survival mechanism as well, I imagine, to some extent, to kind of be like, oh, what an idiot.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are things, he talks about other things with a lot more emotion, but it seems that, some of it's got to kind of just bounce off you. Otherwise you'll go mad. There's some we'll talk about some other quotes in a bit, but so a lot of this stuff comes directly from
his own war experiences.
From his own war experiences, yeah. That's what I've got to say about that.
I like when he meets all this gang, that he bumps into this other platoon and he knows the Japanese American guy and he respects him and he thinks he's competent. And then he goes around and he meets some of the other characters, and there's just some amusing stuff in there that I don't know if this came directly from Fuller's War Days or something, but it comes off like some of it's genuinely funny, and it's like, for example, there's like a chaplain, I guess. He's like the kind of the chaplain with the group, and he's got this organ he's lugging around, and it says Fat Paul on the side of it. And he's like, what is that your name? Are you Fat Paul? And he's like, no, it's Father Paul, but the HER burned off, in a fire or whatever. And it's just like a really nice like detail, like a really nice like little moment, and this kind of absurd thing that's kind of memorable as well. This guy like Fat Paul on his organ.
There's a lot of it.
Um,
Like there's the bald GI who's kind of really self-conscious and kind of takes his helmet off and talks about losing his head as a kid, and Tanaka, the Japanese American, starts to talk about, oh, because he's bought these the oil. They're talking about these oils that he's bought to try and get his hair growing back. He talks about using massage to get his mother's hair back and things like that. And he's the GR asks him, "Did you do it himself?" And he says, "Of course. You don't think I'd let anybody else massage my bald-headed mother, do you?" Things like that. It's just really nice little kind of nice little moments of kind of top bants, I guess, if you want to be an arsehole about it.
I think that Fuller, hearing what you said about his intention, I think Fuller was only half successful because he doesn't really. Basically, there's only 30 minutes of them walking, and then they get to this temple where they spend the rest of the film. And that 30 minutes of them walking is punctuated by constant action. There's the ambush of some people in some trees who they shoot. There's the booby trap body. There's lots of kind of instances that happen there. So I don't necessarily think the film does show the kind of the boredom and then horror, the boredom and then the horror sort of thing. I think there are war movies that, like Jarhead, for example, that do that maybe a lot better. But it's also only like a, what is it, like a 90 something minute
Less
movie.
than that,
It's
it's
quite
about
short.
85, I think.
And yeah, exactly. It's under sub 90 minutes. And like I say, after 30 minutes of the walking, you spend the rest of the film at the temple, which I can imagine is also potentially a budget thing, like they shot on that location for the rest of the shoot or something. Well, not location, that's set, because it's clearly not a real place. But yeah, I mean, did you get that same sense? Because I don't
Yes,
feel like
and
there's necessarily the boredom of the
yes and
walking.
no. I mean, like he talks about, very short instances of violence. So the blowing up of the body is not an action scene. It's a single shot of a dummy being blown up and then kind of just back to where we are. Like, I wouldn't call it an action scene. It's just kind of an interjection. The war,
But
the battle. I'd agree with you. But what I really like the battle, because it's not sort of thing you've seen before with people leaning over barricades shooting. It's people scrambling around in the dirt trying to keep their heads down, not showing where they're going. And the only other person that kind of Zach kind of Gene Evans' character Zach kind of takes control a little bit, and the only other person that he can sort of rely on that moment is Tanaka, who kind of they kind of do this back to back thing and get everybody out, but everybody's just scrambling around trying to get there. It's not a heroic battle. It's this kind of dirty little scrap in the mud trying to basically just stop what's happening, isn't it? It's quite
yeah,
yeah, it's a good little scene. It's a
it
nice little
is.
ambush.
No, my point was less that the blowing up of the body was like an
But
action
yeah,
beat, and more that it's not boring. Like there's not. It's an interesting thing that happens on the journey. It is there
yeah,
aren't too many scenes. Like if the film had more budget and more time, maybe there could have been half an hour more around those instances of them just being bored. Not
yeah,
necessarily the film being boring, but just of things happening that are more mundane and more sort of just arduous. I don't
yeah. I
think you
mean,
get a
like I
lot of
say,
that.
I think a lot of that mundanity's in the dialogue and the conversations, because they don't really tend to talk that often about what they're actually supposed to be doing. It's like, oh, we just got to get here and then we'll figure it out later. It's the conversations around everything about what they've done in their real lives and things like that. But yeah, I think you're probably right. There isn't enough of it if in a 80 plus minute film to really get that across. I would imagine we'll see a lot more of that if we watch the extended cut of the Big Red One, because that's kind of a much kind of larger scale budget version of what he's trying to do here. And I
And
think
more
that,
autobiographical, isn't it? Big Red One.
yeah, and I think this is the start of a cycle of war films, or not necessarily a cycle, but it's the start of like recurrence of war films within his filmography that all have similar things to say and are directly influence and are a response to his own like incredible military career throughout Africa, Italy, Germany, France. You know, he's got this wealth of experience that he brings to these films that gives them a sense of authenticity, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely get that sense, and it's like I can't say it is authentic, but I can definitely say it feels authentic, and it does feel authentic despite its shortcomings, despite the clearly kind of low budget and how scrappy a lot of it is. It definitely does feel authentic, and I think a lot of that's Gene Evans. A lot of that is clearly that Fuller and Evans together both have had this experience in World War II, and that kind of translates, I think, a lot on screen, directly in some of the instances like the booby trap body and stuff. That I think it's really,
I mean, there's
really
other things that I wonder that haven't been specifically mentioned in the stuff I've read about, but there's a bit where the sort of green lieutenant is kind of accidentally pulls the pin out of a grenade and it's sitting in his stomach, and he's like frozen with fear, and everybody else kind of acts quite nonchalantly, and Tanaka just kind of grabs it and puts the pin back in it.
That's the moment that I thought when I was listing things that might have upset the American government or whatever. Like that's the moment that I thought was the most telling for kind of incompetent command, much more competent POC infantryman, because he's shown to be a bit of a buffoon there. Like he's, oh my god, this lieutenant who we've already seen making the wrong choices and doesn't really know what he's doing. Now he's taken the pin out of his grenade. He's going to blow everyone up. What a doofus! And the way that Tanaka walks over to him and so nonchalantly deals with it, so easily, without any fear, that the kind of the disparity between the competence and bravery of the lieutenant versus Tanaka is so pronounced that I can imagine, especially combined with the lines that exist in the film about how that guy's got the wrong eyes to get promoted and all of this.
Yeah.
I can see how that would have raised eyebrows, got people upset.
And it's not his only bit of hand grenade business that he gets to do. Later on, he's got this stick grenade, and he's just sort of throwing it around and tapping people on the head with it as well. He's so in control throughout it. He's particularly fond of grenades, but he's got such this kind of calm, level-headed kind of persona to him that he kind of exudes competence in a way that I mean, you know, Zach does as well. He's a little bit more gruff about it as well, and the medic whose name escapes me as well, they, you know, it's clear that the POCs are the kind of, they are the most they are by far the most competent members of this outfit. The kind of you've got the Private Baldy, Richard Monahan, who looks a little bit like Billy Corgan. I've put in my notes. Who's your kind of typical kind of slightly ridiculous farm boy kind of type, who's a little bit kind of you know, not altogether with it. And you've got the conscientious objector who wants to go off, and who was a conscientious objector in World War II, wants to go off and join the priesthood as well, who's kind of taking the kind of taking it all a little bit too soulfully in the moment. Do you know what I mean? He's kind of it's really, but it's these three characters who are the true soldiers, if you like, the kind of Gene Evans, the people who just get on with it, despite the fact that it is madness and that it is absolutely ridiculous. I found that that quote from Sam Fuller. It's a little bit past the it's a little bit past the discussion, but it's you can't make a real war picture because the audience can get up and go buy their popcorn at any time. They're never hurt. And war means casualties. The best way would be to occasionally fire at them from behind the screen during a battle scene. No, really, I'm not joking about this. If someone once in a while was hit, that would give the audience a feel of the tension of war. So that's his. That's what he's saying.
Excellent. Here. Excellent. I can see why Goddard's a big fan. I can imagine Goddard saying that earnestly in a movie. That's what needs to happen in a cinema. There are some bits that sneak in of Fuller's kind of slightly prescriptive, awkward sort of dialogue where you get like in Baron of Arizona, you had the bit, for example, where this guy turns up and goes, "I'm a landowner. We all are." And in this one, you get like Short Round introduces himself by saying South Korean, and then you get the guy later who turns up and goes, "I am a North Vietnamese communist," which is that's how the prisoner of war introduces himself. I'm a North Vietnamese communist, which I don't think is a thing anyone's ever said, but it's very good. Like,
I think the North Korean communist has got particularly good English, and kind of that really rubs up against. But the Short Round, he's got stilted English anyway. And he's trying. I'll forgive Short Round a little bit, to be honest.
But it's just that tendency, the way people introduce themselves in Sam Fuller films. You know, I'm the mailman. Like they do, just people do just say what they do and what they are. But they're very. Like, but I think you said this in the first episode. Like he's quite direct, and he doesn't want really any sort of fanning around, does he?
Yeah, I mean, he talks about brevity and impatience, and the quickest way to do things. Like, you know, for instance, the discussion about internment camps and segregation in the US is just that. It's a discussion. It's nicely contextualized because it is the prisoner of war sort of trying to play mind games a little bit and trying to get into the heads of his captors, but it is kind of just out loud spoken. But you know, I think in the context of when this was made, you know, what the civil rights movement really kicks off in earnest. I mean, it, you know, really takes off in the early to mid 60s, and this is 10 years before that. Internment camps, I'm guessing, have only been closed for, I don't know a lot about them, but they've only been closed for what, 5 years at most at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's tackling these things head on and saying you're willing to send these men out to die for your country. You know.
I don't know if he was just being careful or whether these were the best arguments that he thought of or he bought into them. But the North Korean guy makes really good arguments. And then the arguments that come back are so weak, like for the Americans. Like you get this, I get what you're saying, like it's 10 years before a lot of this stuff, kind of ahead of its time. And the things that they are saying in the film are already going to be like challenging and kind of making people angry, possibly in the audience anyway, for even having the conversation. Like even in America today, a lot of these things just make people, you know, they don't want to hear about them. So I do get that. But you have the bit where, for example, he says to the black guy, the medic, that, hey, hang on, you're fighting for these people, but when you go back home, you have to sit at the back of the bus, right? And then the black guy's like, yeah, but you know, it took 50 years to get the back of the bus, and maybe in another 50 years we'll be in the middle of the bus. And he's like really optimistic about it. Just takes time, you know, and you got to go slow, which seems like a really, like, I guess, a really establishment view of sort of like, just wait 100 years. Don't kick up a fuss. And then you get this other bit with the internment camps where he's talking to the Japanese American about it. And the Japanese American's response is like, look, we get pushed around at home, but what we really don't like is when foreigners push us around abroad, all right? They can do that because they're Americans like me, and we'll discuss that ourselves, but you're out of order because you're not even an American. It's just like the most non-argument response to what this person said that's actually completely valid. But it's, you know, I think that...
Yeah, I mean, it's not a deep discussion, and it is... You know, it's the views it's the voice of a sort of, you know, it's the voice of a white man in his early to mid 30s speaking in the 1950s, and he's clearly got the right intentions, but the conversation's not moved far enough. I think the 50 years thing is what really rubs it up, is like the slowness of it. But I think there's also some truth to be said that like proper systemic change does take time, and you know, maybe moving from the back of a bus to the middle of a bus to the front of a bus
the best example
is well, let's say unambitious. But
I completely agree with you. Like, its heart's in the right place, and I think it's brave and sort of daring and confrontational for the time it's made. But I think that it's worth pointing out that and I think part of the reason the responses are not particularly good is because the North Korean guy just is right.
Yeah.
It's like there isn't really a lot you can say short of the other characters going, "Yeah, you're right. It's really shit, but we're working to change it." Like, there's not a lot you can say.
And I think there is definitely, there's definitely some, there is definitely a sense that Sam Fuller is making these critiques as well and saying this is shit, not overly trying to defend it. There is a quote from him actually, where he talks about the ideals of America that we constantly fail to live up to. So he is definitely definitely kind of saying there, you know, we've got to do better.
Yes, absolutely, and you do definitely get that impression, and you get the impression that the contradiction between, you know, we're fighting for freedom, we're fighting against tyranny, we're fighting this other way of life that's not the American way, but the American way being so problematic back home. He's definitely raising that to the fore, which I guess leads me to the question that you'll be able to answer, presumably on the context, is how did this film do? Like, was this well received by audiences? How did critics respond to it?
So it came out as an A picture, and it was a massive hit, made $2 million dollars at the box office, on, you know, which is kind of 20 times its money. Was critically really well received, was also kind of controversial and sort of lambasted on sort of both sides for being jingoistic or absolutely liberal. You know, and it kind of it caught the attention of J. Edgar Hoover as well. So it had a really good I've got a little quote here. Again, I'm finding these a little bit too late, but to go back to what you were saying about the conversations, that kind of dialogue was a slap in people's face. Yet why back away from confronting racism in America? After all, it wasn't just blacks who suffered injustice. I want to show about other minorities. Long before the Nisei internments of Japanese Americans was general knowledge, I had my characters in the steel helmet talking about it. So yeah, he is definitely trying to highlight these things and not wave them over, basically. Yeah, so it says here, despite or maybe because of the controversy, the film did great business. One report of Victor Reisel called me pro-communist and anti-American. One of the country's most reactionary newspaper men, Westford Pedravy, wrote that I was secretly financed by the Reds and should be investigated by the Pentagon. My mother telephoned to congratulate me about all the great publicity for the picture. Hello, comrade, laughed Rebecca. Yeah, so he's called reactionary by Hedda Hopper, Grand Dame of the Patriots and Conservatives. And J. Edgar Hoover starts an investigation into it. The main thing they seem to have problems with is the shooting of a POW. And that's at least, even if they're really worried about the talk about racism and the problem, what they hang on to is the idea that an American GI would shoot a POW, and he is called into the Pentagon to talk about it, and they say he's called in, and these people have just watched it, and they say, you know, did you see anybody shoot a POW? And he said, of course I saw people shoot POWs. It happens, you know, commonly. Do you think this is, do you think this is something that is, you know, is this something that Americans do? And he says, yes, it is. They also bring up the name Thompson, which is the name of the black medic. And apparently Thompson was a code name for communist agents living in the suburbs. And it's just a coincidence, basically. Because it's the name of a guy called Turkey Thompson, a heavyweight fighter who was a friend of his, and by coincidence he happened to be staying at Fuller's house at that point. So he said, "Look, it's just a friend of mine. Ring my house, He's staying with me. You know, I know him personally. I named the character after this boxer, and he's this well-known boxer, so everyone kind of goes, yeah, all right.
It's his war experiences there have helped him a lot as well, because if you or I wrote about American troops murdering POWs and the Pentagon called us in, we'd be in a little bit more maybe like hot water, not really able to sort of explain or justify it very easily. But he could just be like, "Look, I saw it all the time, mate. I was there. I did it." You know, like there's no real comeback.
And it sounds like he was quite aggressive in these meetings as well. So
yeah.
He goes, did a prisoner of war ever get shot? I asked him. Of course they did, said General Taylor. So he's like saying, he says to the general as well, like, you know this stuff happens. I thanked him and hung up. We all know the Geneva Convention rules, but war's irrational. Order breaks down. A guy's been trying to kill you, sticks his hands in the air and says now that he's your prisoner. Sometimes it doesn't fly because he just shot your body. You kill him. It's shameful. It's against the convention, but it happens. Damn it. I was only reporting it with a camera. I answered every one of your goddamn questions, I said to them as I got up to go. If you have any more, you can call me Mr. Fuller. I'm a civilian now and happy to be one.
In the parlance of, I don't know, British culture about 20 years ago, legend.
So yeah, he just goes in there and says, basically, is why the hell are you you're wasting my time? You're all completely fucking stupid. I ain't got time for this. I got films to make, basically.
Nice.
Comes out of it. Yeah,
that's great. So that's really good. So so it doesn't lead anywhere. He doesn't find himself blacklisted. He doesn't get called up before HUAC or anything like that.
No, I mean he's still in a pretty kind of he goes into a bit of a purple patch. Really, let me just double check his filmography here.
Because Fixed Bayonets is next, isn't it?
Fixed Bayonets. Yeah, he has another crack at the Korean War after that. So, you know, he's okay for the time being. I don't think there's no major repercussions to begin with. But obviously people are keeping an eye on him. But he does go after Fixed Bayonets into a couple of non-war films. But yeah, no, he works pretty solidly. Fixed Bayonets is actually in the same year, 1951. And then Park Row is in 52, Pick Up on South Street in 53. Back to the War with Hell and High Water in 54, House of Bamboo 55, Chinagate, Run of the Arrow, and 40 Guns all in 57.
Wow. So, is this all with Lippert still? Or, you know, does he work with him for a long time through this?
No, this is the end of the Lippert era.
Okay.
So the next is his kind of foray into studio filmmaking with Fixed Bayonets. So he's got studio backing and budgets for the next one. And
interesting.
Yeah. Which is especially interesting when we contrast it to the film that follows that as well.
Okay.
Which he goes from studio financing to self-financing.
Okay, interesting. So he kind of covers the whole gamut, because you obviously that's interesting to hear about self-financing, because, like, for example, somebody like John Cassavetes gets a lot of credit for being kind of a true independent, like in the 70s. So it's interesting to see somebody doing that in the 50s context as well in American cinema on a notable sort of high level with like box office and such. So as we covered, they are in.
There was another. Yep. Oh, so just another couple of little bits of business here as well. So there's just something else to kind of just pick up on. So Gene Evans, Sergeant Zach, goes on to be a regular of Sam Fuller's cast, and also Niall Morrow, who is the unfortunate one who gets blown up, who's a blink and you miss him, but he ends up doing 4 or 5 films with Sam Fuller as well.
Okay, so there's a couple of members of the Rogues Gallery turn up. So basically, I don't know where he got to in actually talking through the film, but it was basically not much left after he shoots the POW because Short Round gets killed. And then there is this battle. They fight waves of people. The temple basically explodes all over the place on fire. Buddha statues blowing up all over the shop. And like I said at the beginning, like when the battle ends, there's only these few survivors, and they basically get brought into another unit and walked off towards another nest of enemies waiting for them to do the whole thing again. So it's quite a bleak ending, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and that is something that definitely comes through in his autobiography as well, as he tells these stories of, we did this and then we walked there and then we did this and then these people got killed and we got moved into here and then somebody got separated, and that's the idea, is that it's just this endless plodding. Plodding.
You mentioned that he was attacked on sort of both sides of the aisle. What was the side that thought he was being jingoistic? What was the basis? Because the film seems very deliberately questioning and critical of war and of this. What are the examples of people calling it, I don't know, a war propaganda movie or whatever? Because I can't see it myself.
No, I can't see it. He doesn't go into a lot of detail. He just says, the Daily Worker wrote, "This shows what beasts American soldiers are. The reviewer called me a reactionary for making a beast the hero of the movie." So I
Right.
guess that was the main. The
Right.
protagonist shoots somebody and is the hero, but that's quite a simple accusation that gets thrown around a lot when people, when you've got a protagonist rather than a hero in a movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. So basically, it was people seeing Gene Evans do things and thinking because he was the protagonist, they were being endorsed in some way. Okay, interesting. I can see that. Yeah. But it's not. I don't think there's any reading of this which is like gung ho pro war, and and that's one of the ways that I don't think this would have worked at all as a John Wayne film, because not only do his characters tend to be in those sorts of movies, but he as an individual was of that sensibility and was very unquestioning and patriotic of sort of just any American sort of engagements like this. So I can't imagine it would have survived contact with John Wayne and been the same movie, which I guess is why Fuller turned it down and decided not to take that approach.
I've not watched a lot of John Wayne films. I've seen the key ones, but they don't massively appeal. I also wonder if John Wayne would have had a touch of the Vin Diesels about him and would have refused to be shell-shocked at the end. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't want to show that physical weakness, or what would be perceived as a mental weakness at the end. I don't know if John Wayne had a calculator for punches and delivered and received, and had to make sure that he had an equal number. But I know what you mean. There would be a simple version of this story that was very much about heroism and self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
But the key thing is that although they know they're fighting the communists and they know they have to deliver these bombs, there's no real sense of why anything is happening. It's just happening. And people don't have the big picture. Even the CO, they're just in this sort of waking nightmare of violence and monotony. And I think the film's better for it, and even because of its limitations as well. I don't think it suffers from being low budget and kind of being on sets and whatnot. The interplay, the kind of interpersonal stuff, it's all they're all very, very believable characters. And having an unknown actor, and not a at the time, and not a particularly big star afterwards either. I'm not sure exactly what Gene Evans went on to do. He's in a couple of things.
Yeah, he's not. He doesn't go on to become a huge star or anything.
No, I think he pops up in some things, and he becomes a bit of a character actor. But it's not something that starts off a stellar career. But it does start this partnership, collaborative partnership with Sam Fuller that kind of persists for a little while at least. I think the last thing they make together is Shock Corridor in 1963, I think.
If Sam Fuller, not Sam Fuller, sorry, Gene Evans. I was just looking at him on Letterboxd. He's in a film. He's not high up the cast list. He's quite low down the cast list. He's in a film from 1969 that has a hilariously bad poster on Letterboxd, and it's a film called "Support Your Local Sheriff."
Excellent.
But yeah,
oh, I can see the poster as well.
Yeah, it's one of those like mid 2000s DVD covers, isn't it? Is what it looks like. Anyway,
it kind of looks a little bit like a early 80s Panini sticker book.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to Fixed Bayonets because moving in a similar, going in a similar vein, but into studio budgets, and I'm interested. I think my main kind of area of interest for it is: does this mean we stop seeing things like kind of cheap optical zooms? Does this mean we are seeing more on location and things like that? Or is Fuller, for want of a better description, because I don't really mean this too pejorative, but is he like inherently a kind of a sloppy director? Like, does he to some extent not care? I guess it's how much is it he doesn't care about being kind of formally sort of very tidy and sophisticated, and how much of it at this point's been budget? And I think we'll start to see the answer to that in some of these studio ones.
Well, especially because this is it's got a very similar plot. It's about a platoon left as a rear guard to defend somewhere. So it's a small band of people locked in a bottle, you know, with a mission, in much the same way that the ending of Steel Helmet is. So just with a much larger budget. Yeah. So, you know, it's a really good comparison piece, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. Well, I'm looking forward to that. You've not seen Fixed Bayonets either, have you?
Oh, no. There's also just a little bit of production notes here. Apparently, the US Army assigned a technical advisor on this one in response to what they saw in Steel Helmet as well. So
yeah. I've always wondered when you see that there are these like military advisors on films, how much is that they've been asked for by the production to give advice, and how much they are just on set going, you can't do
that. Well, we'll see, won't we?
We'll see. Yeah. All right then. Awesome. I enjoyed that. That's the second time I've seen it, and I think it holds up. I think it's a jolly good one. So, but that for me, this is out of the ones I've seen. This is the high watermark, including some of the later ones I've seen. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing if he beats it.
Okay. Well, that's us for today, and we'll see you soon with Fixed Bayonets.
See you later.